Hey, welcome to the Inner Circle podcast, where growth minded leaders come together to build better businesses and better lives. I'm your host, Hector Alvarado. Here, we don't do theory, we share real lessons, real systems, and real strategies you can use right away. This is a community for people committed to growth, impact, and supporting each other on the journey. You're in the right room, my friends. Let's get started. Great having everybody here. Welcome to another one of our OBS and Inner Circle calls. We start this 4-part series with performance leadership because we really want to make sure that as we discuss leadership development, we are getting to actionable, steady, consistent, teachable traits that we can have leaders developed for many years to come. And so I started to look at this and thought, all right, we need tools. We need real tools that can help leaders improve performance, not leadership styles or leadership traits. We can go get those. We've talked about those before. I wanted to get right to pure leadership guidelines and develop skills from a leadership perspective. So today, we want to start week 1 with the expectations blueprint. This will help you set standards so clear, accountability becomes natural. That's the expectation of today's meeting, is that you become so clear on how to set standards as we move forward. So as we begin, I want you to think about someone on your team right now, someone who isn't performing the way you need them to. And I know all of you can think of somebody. So go ahead, take 10 seconds, think about who that is, get them in your head. Got it? Good. Now, answer this honestly. Don't give me any BS because you know we're going to talk about it. We're going to flush it out if you're going to give me BS. Okay? Did you ever tell them in specific, measurable terms exactly what good looks like in their role? Not the job description. Don't tell me the job description. Not the general impression you gave them in the interview when you had a high level conversation. The actual standard, written down, specific, and something you both agreed on. If you're being honest with me right now, most leaders will say that the answer is no. And that, let me be clear, that's not the employee problem. That's not an employee problem at all. That is a leadership problem. Because you cannot hold someone accountable to a standard that was never defined, right? Now, you can be frustrated by it, 100%. You will be, by the way, frustrated by it. You can vent all you want about it. You can even fire someone over it. But you cannot fairly, again, you cannot fairly hold them accountable to it because outside of your own head, it was never actually defined and it was not really existent. And that's what we're fixing today. So I'm going to start with a bit of a story. I sat across a leader, a business owner who was about to fire this operations manager in a service company a few years ago. Good guy, very, very good guy, well spoken, kind of shined for me when I first met this manager. He had been working as the operations manager for a couple years in this organization, but deadlines kept slipping, he kept missing them, and the owner had reached his limit. So before you make the call, I want you to answer one question. I said, if you pull this guy into this room right now and ask him to describe in writing exactly what you expect from his role, the actual numbers, the actual standard, could he do it accurately? And then he went quiet. He thought about it for a minute because he already knew the answer. The operations manager wasn't failing a standard. He was guessing at one and guessing wrong because the standard had never actually left that owner's head is what was happening. And that owner didn't truly have a true performance problem. He had a definition problem. So we built one together using the blueprint, using the tools that we're going to talk about today. Now, I didn't know it at the time. I was sort of just going through it with my own motion. But after looking at some, some frameworks out there, I believe that this is what we did together. And we were able to turn that questionable hire into a strong hire down the road. Now, keep in mind, nothing about the employee changed. Like the employee was still himself, that his personality, his behaviors didn't change, but he ended up being one of the strongest guys because at the end of the day, he actually had targets to hit. And it finally existed outside of the leader's head on what the expectation was and what good and great actually meant. So this week, one of those things that we're going to hit on in this 4-part series is exactly how to build that so that you as a leader can have a team that performs well and great without you in the room. That's going to be the first sort of structure around this performance leader 4-part series that we're going to create. So if you went through a few weeks ago, maybe even a few months ago, we did a 4 workplace culture series. Most of you that are here today were part of that. If not, you could go listen to it on our podcast channels. You've already built your culture blueprint. We showed you how to do that. You define the environment that you want to lead in. This series will give you the metrics to enforce that culture with clarity and consistently without destroying the relationships that make the culture worth having in the first place. Every performance problem you will ever deal with as a leader traces back to one of 4 failures. Now get your pens ready because here they are. Here's the 4 failures. The first one is unclear expectations. Second one is absent coaching. Third is avoided hard conversations. And the fourth is inconsistent standards. Today, we're going to solve failure number 1, unclear expectations, because it's one thing everything sits on top of. It comes from unclear expectations. You cannot coach someone towards a standard that doesn't exist. You cannot have a hard conversation about a gap that has never been defined. And you cannot be consistent about something you've never written down. So before we build anything in this series, we have to build the foundation, and that's that expectations blueprint, okay? So here's what happens in almost every growing business. The leader hires someone, gives them a general sense of the role in the interview, right? You have your 2-way questions, you talk about the role, and then you hire them. You bring them in, you walk them through the job for a few days, maybe even up to 2 weeks, depending if it's not a fire hire, right? You know what I mean by a fire hire? It's you had to place them in there because you had a fire that was burning and you had to throw them in there, right? Well, maybe you give them a few days or a few weeks, and then you let them go at it on their own. Now, the expectations exist, but they exist as a feeling in the leader's head, not as a standard the employee can actually see. Employee can't measure themselves against or even be held to because what you gave them was a job description. They walked away with a job description. That's it. So weeks go by, something goes wrong, and all of a sudden deadlines start to get missed. A customer complains, a quality slips, and now you, the leader, you're frustrated because you think they should have known that. They should have been able to action it. But was it ever actually said to them? Was it written down and agreed upon? Not formally. I can probably bet you a lot of money that it wasn't. It was just a job description and an overview that you gave them. And this is the trap that happens most of the time. Vague expectations feel efficient in the moment, and they actually feel effective. You save yourself an uncomfortable conversation up front. But guess what? They cost you everything downstream. Every performance conversation becomes subjective from that point on. How many of those conversations have you had where it's subjective? People don't understand what the good and the bad is. So every piece of accountability becomes a debate about what actually was expected instead of a genuine conversation about the gap itself. And your best people, the ones who actually want to do great at their job, they're left guessing at a target that keeps them moving because it was never fixed. It was never in place to begin with. And the fix isn't more supervision, by the way. I want to make sure that that's not where your head goes. It isn't checking on them more often or hovering over them or becoming a micromanager. That's not what we're talking about here. It's building the standard once in writing so clearly that accountability becomes natural instead of confrontational. And that's what we're talking about when we say the expectations blueprint. So you can get your mind shift into where we're going to journey into today. But before we build it, here's what's going to happen. You're going to face some avoidance and some resistance because most leaders feel it the moment I bring this up. And it sounds like this for those of you wondering, what does it feel like or what does it sound like? Here it is. I don't want to be that leader that is walking around with a binder in the forms. I want to hire good people. I shouldn't have to spell everything out to them like they're children. Now, I understand that instinct, but writing a clear standard isn't treating someone like a child. It's treating them like a professional who deserves to know exactly what they're being measured against. When you hire a contractor for a job at your house, don't you walk through a service agreement on exactly what you expect that service agreement to look like at the end? Well, of course you do. So why wouldn't you do that for the people that you're hiring to work for you or with you, right? The leaders who resist this the hardest are usually the ones who have the vaguest expectations of their own team. And they are likely to be the ones that are the most frustrated when it shows up. They are the ones today feeling that burn because they were vague at the beginning. Now, here's a second version of that resistance. This one's common. I'm going to hear it a lot, and you will too, is I don't have time to write all this out. Now, the honest answer, for sure I get it, is you don't have the time, right? But let me tell you, you don't have time not to. Because every performance conversation you have without a written standard takes longer, will feel worse, and will solve less than the conversation that you would have had if you'd done it up front. Because you're not adding work, okay? You're not. By having this conversation up front, you're not adding work. You're front loading work that would cost you much more later on in time. So just have that opportunity to talk about it up front at the beginning so you can make sure that you don't have disagreements about that expectation later. So those resistance, set them aside for the next few minutes, 20 minutes or so as we build this thing out together, okay? Set those things. If you believe that those are what's going to hold you back, just put them on the side and let's work through it. There's going to be expectations around a blueprint, and these expectations have 4 parts. Think of this less like a job description, but more like a scoreboard. Something specific enough that both of you could look at independently and agree whether the standard was met or not. And I always like to use the frame, you're either pregnant or you're not, because it's pretty simple. You can't say that you're halfway pregnant, right? So in the same concept, we're going to take that approach here. Okay. So component number 1 is the outcome. And this is the result the role exists to produce, not the task, the outcome. A job description lists tasks, answers the phone and enter the data, run the crew. That's a job description. That just creates a list of tasks. An outcome tells you why those tasks matter in the first place. So, for example, for a site supervisor, the outcome isn't just manage the crew. The outcome is the job finishes on schedule, on budget, to a specific requirement with a safe site. Now, that will actually exist to produce. When you hear of it, you're like, whoa, okay, my outcome is I have to finish on schedule, on budget, to the specific specs on the service agreement, and with no incidents. That's what you're being accountable for. Very different than manage the crew, eh? Like, just think about that for yourselves. If somebody gave you that description and that expected outcome, very different. Component number 2 is the standard. This is where most leaders stop being specific. And it's exactly where you can't afford to stop. The standard turns the outcome into a number, a deadline, or a clear yes or no bar. Not good communication with the client, but specifically, client receives a written update every Friday by 3 p.m., no exceptions. Not keep quality high. That sounds so vague, right? But think of rework rate under 3% per job. If you can't measure it, or if you have two reasonable people could disagree on whether it was hit or not, then it's not a standard yet. It's still feeling like a wearable standard with a suit. That's not set yet, right? Now, the third component is the behavior, and this is the how. Okay. This has to be specific, repeatable actions that produce the outcome day to day. The leadership sometimes skips this piece more than any other. And it's the piece that actually turns the standard from a judgment into a coaching tool. So if the standard is rework rate under 3%, the behavior might be walks the site with a checklist before signing off on any phase of a completion job. Now, you're not just telling someone that number to hit, you're telling them what to actually do to hit it. That's the difference between grading someone and developing them. The fourth component is a rhythm review, because this is when and how the standard will actually be checked on. And it has to be built up front. I want to be clear about that. Not invented after something goes wrong. Weekly, bi weekly, monthly, whatever fits the role, but it has to be scheduled and known in advance by both of you. The standard that nobody ever reviews quietly becomes optional. And that optional standards aren't standards at all. You have to know that. If you leave it to by chance and you leave it to be optional, then what your message is that your standards are optional and they will only be checked on when something goes wrong, right? Now, outcome, standard, behavior, review rhythm, 4 parts. That's the whole framework on its own. I'm going to give you a couple examples on how this applies to a few businesses so that you can maybe start to see how it applies to your business. So let's build one rollout together in 4 pieces, and we'll do this together as we go, okay? Let's take a sales role, because everybody has a sales account manager role that they need in their business. So we're gonna say the outcome is to retain and grow the existing client base. So revenue per account increases year over year. That's the outcome. That's what we want. The standard is zero client churn without a documented recovery attempt. We're not going to lose anybody, but if we do, we're going to make at least one recovery attempt. A minimum of one upsell or expansion conversation logged in per active account per quarter. A client health check completed and logged every 30 days. That's the standard. The behavior is you're going to review account health scores every Monday morning, log them every client touch point in the CRM within 24 hours. And you're going to flag any accounts showing at risk signals to a leader within 48 hours of noticing them. Not that next scheduled date that you have to check in with that client. No, no. You're going to make sure that this gets escalated within 48 hours. And the rhythm is the account health review is logged every 2 weeks. A full quarterly business review of the entire sales book is done quarterly. And you're going to sit with a one-to-one with your business unit leader every week. Notice what happened there? Nothing in that blueprint is about feeling. Nothing in there was about feeling. Nothing in it is about be more proactive. Go grow your accounts. It wasn't like that. It's every single line is something you could look at together and both agree, yes, that happened, or no, it didn't. Because that's the whole point. You removed the subjective aspect of it. And when you remove that subject situation, you remove most of the conflict that normally comes with a performance conversation. And that's the tough part that most leaders try to avoid, right? In those tough conversations, why do they become tough? Because they're subjective, because you're talking about feelings, you're not talking about facts. And that is where it gets problematic for most leaders. So let's do one more. This framework works outside of sales. One of my favorite areas is operations. So I'm going to do an operations lead one. Okay. Now, this could be used for warehouse, distribution, transportation, or anything where you have to move stuff. The outcome that we're going to set and expect is orders ship complete on time, damage free. By the way, that's a Willie Trucking core value that we put in place. We ship damage free. So there's the plug for that one. So the customer never has to think about the warehouse at all. Okay, that's the outcome. Outbound orders ship complete on time, damage free. So the customer never has to think about the warehouse at all. Now, the standard 98% on time shipment. That's setting the bar quite high, right? This is to be measured weekly. Fewer than half of a percent of orders shipped within an error in zero recordable safety incidents. That's the standard. That's what we're looking for in an operations lead to manage. Behavior runs the pick and pack floor. So that's out on the warehouse floor. Checks every shift change that you're checking for that. Reviews the previous day shipping expectations first thing each morning. And before anything else, escalates any staffing or equipment gap that threatens the ship window the same day is identified, not at the end of the week. So if we have anything that's going to prevent us from hitting our daily goals from a shipping perspective, we're going to communicate that upstream to other managers, other leaders in other departments, other teams to help us close that gap. And the review rhythm is shipping metrics are reviewed every Monday, every week, and we do a safety walk logged and reviewed with the leader monthly to make sure that we don't have any safety gaps throughout the month. Same structure, but two different roles. Now, that's what makes this framework stick because it's not a template that you have to reinvent every time. It has four components that hold no matter what seat you're building it for. Okay. Now you might think, all right, that sounds great, but how do I make this make sense? Now, before you finalize any blueprint, run it through one specific test that will actually make sure that it actually sticks and that it's understood. And I call it the stranger test. Hand it to someone who has never met the person in the role and has no context about your business and ask them one question. Based only on what is written here, can you tell me whether this person's currently succeeding or failing? And if the stranger with confidence can tell you, yeah, makes sense to me, then your blueprint is done. Then it makes sense. But if they can't and they have to ask you follow-up questions, then that's what it's a bit too vague. And you still have to produce some work on it. You still have to go back to set the standard so that it's not vague anymore. Okay? Now, you've got your framework, you're ready to go to work, you've written it out, now you're ready to roll this out. Now, how you introduce this to your team is just as critical as the framework itself. Please do not go hand someone a finished document that feels like a write-up tomorrow because you sat on this call and now you're ready to go and provide someone a blueprint about their role. Do not do that because that will create fear, and fear produces compliance, not ownership. This framework was designed so that you're actually clarifying your side of the deal, so that every real chance is actually available to that other person to succeed in their role. So here's what I'd like you to do. And you can even use this word for word if you'd like. You can go back to listen to the recording and use it if you wish. And it's when you go talk to somebody directly, say, "Listen, Bob, I realize that I've never actually written down specifically what a great version of your role looks like. Now, that's on me, Bob. It's not on you. So I want to build that with you together. I don't want to hand it to you. So we're both going to be working off the exact same targets. And we're going to sit through this together to build it together. Does that make sense?" Bob's probably going to be like, "Yeah, that sounds fair. Let's go to work." Now, from there, you build in the 3 steps. Step 1, you draft the outcome and the standard. That's your call as the leader. That's not his. That's you. That's the deal that you're offering for the role. That's where you set the outcome and the standard. That is no input from Bob. Step 2, now bring them in on the behavior. Ask Bob how they actually hit that standard day to day. Here's the interesting fact that you're going to find is people commit to behaviors that they help define far more often than behaviors handed down to them. It's crazy, but when you actually get involved in it, you actually own the engagement. And often they'll suggest something far more specific than even what you or I would have written down. It's weirdly odd that way, but it happens because people are their biggest judges, and so they will actually be organic in that setup. And step three is you agree on the rhythm together. That's how often we'll meet. Let them help pick the cadence that fits on how the work is actually done. As long as it's frequent enough to matter and it's on the calendar, that's it. That's what matters. That's the point. Do not just imply it. Put it on the calendar and then make sure that you follow through. Because once you've built it together, both of you sign off on it, literally. I'm not like in writing. Don't just say it and then walk away, but sign on it. And then you both get that copy. Agreeing on this makes the standard stick instead of an opinion that the individual is left with. Now, I know again, because I've done it, I've been in your shoes, and you're like, that sounds great, Hector, but real life doesn't work like that. I know there's gonna be some pushback. And that's true, that you will have some pushback. But let me be clear that this pushback isn't fear. Okay? It isn't fear. And if you hear that pushback, it is in fact pushback. So let's handle the most common versions that you're going to hear. The first is, this feels like you don't trust me. Again, because you didn't do it when they started and you're doing it late, that's going to be the first one. And here's how you respond to that. Actually, Bob, it's quite the opposite. I'm giving you something clear enough that you can succeed on your own terms without needing me in the room to tell you whether you're on track or not. And that actually, Bob, is a lot more trust than less. So it's setting you up for success. The second pushback you're going to hear is, listen, my role changes too much for this to work. That's that's only nice on, some seats, but it's not necessarily true for me. All right. Well, as that may be the case, the reality is that that's not true. That just only is a feeling that this individual's having. So respond with this. Let's write down 80% that's consistent, and we'll revisit the shifting aspects of your job later in our next review. We don't need it to be perfect today. We just need it real enough to work so that we have a starting point. Let's focus on that. And again, we continue to communicate 80% is best than zero. So get to 80, okay? In both cases, you'll notice the pattern. You're not arguing with anybody. You're simply restating that the blueprint is actually there to work and help them be the best at what they're doing. And you're moving the conversation back towards building it together. You're not there to try to argue with anybody, as you implement it. Now, there are some mistakes that I have found with people as they roll out something similar to this. And I'm going to give you the 4 common mistakes for you to watch out for, okay? The first one is writing standards that are still opinions wearing costumes. That means that they're fake. They're not real, okay? As an example, high quality work, prompt communication, strong ownership. None of those are standards. If you write that down and a second person can't independently check whether it was true, go back and rewrite it until you can finally measure it. Run it through a stranger test if you're unsure. The second mistake is confusing effort with outcome, because you have one that says works hard or stays late are not standards. These are not standards because they don't tell you whether the role actually produced what it existed to produce. I've seen leaders reward the hardest working underperformer on the team simply because effort was visible and outcome wasn't measured. What do I mean by that? Well, Bob was staying late. They put in 14, 16 hours. Okay, but what did Bob accomplish? What did Bob do in those 16 hours? Or did he just hang out for 16 hours drinking coffee and shooting the shit? Right? Like, you got to be able to be measured to know what the outcome is. So always anchor the standard to the result, not the activity around it. The third mistake is building this role, every role at once. Do not sit there and try to write blueprints for your whole organization tonight or tomorrow morning. Don't try to do it all in one sitting. You'll rush the standards, you'll completely rush them all, and you'll go back to vague ones. Start with your top 3 roles in your teams, the ones that have the highest impact, right? Or the ones that have the most vagueness in them today. And get those exactly right before you scale the process across the rest of the organization. And the 4th mistake is writing it once and never touching it again. A blueprint that isn't reviewed on a rhythm cadence becomes wallpaper. That's all that it becomes. And in order for this to be a living document, you actually have to reference it on your one-on-ones, not a file that goes in a folder and gets forgotten by both of you down the road. If you're not opening it up every single week for a review, it's already dead. That will not happen. Now, before we close, I want to close with the following, because I don't want this framework to be confused with something that it isn't. This is not a performance improvement plan. Okay. A PIP, and you'll hear me if you're working with me, you'll hear me use the word PIPs, but a PIP is a document you deploy after things have already gone wrong. And that's usually involving some difficult conversation, potentially, as a last resort before you have to terminate. That document carries a lot of weight, and it should, but that weight is exactly why it's the wrong tool for a day one conversation. The expectations blueprint is opposite. It's a proactive tool, not a corrective one. You built it before there's a problem, and ideally the week 1 when someone starts, or at very least week 2, okay? So that everybody is already comfortable with this. This is not a warning. It's not a disciplinary. It's simply setting standard, writing them down so that the gap, if it ever does show up, you already have something fair and specific to measure against it and to have a reference point versus you having to scramble to define the standard retroactively later, which if you're ever tried to, and I know a lot of us have because I made those mistakes many times as a manager and as a leader, is you're always looking like you're just trying to make it up and to justify a decision. Like that's what happens when you're retroactive in it. So go build the blueprint when things are calm, because that's what's going to make it credible later if you ever have to use it or if you ever need to use it. So that's what we had to bring to you this week. So before we close off, all right, let me close with, let's lock in your 4 components one more time before you forget these things, okay? Outcome is the role, the results the role exists to produce. The standard, the specific measurable bar that defines whether that outcome was hit. The behavior, the repeatable daily actions that produce the outcome. And a review rhythm, when and how the standard actually gets checked on, and that you schedule this for both of you in advance. So here's what I want to leave you with today. Go get those worksheets done from our tutorial series. Go do it. Okay? And by using them, you're going to build a strong foundation in setting your clear expectations. All right? Now, go start, because as we produce these the next 3 weeks, it's only going to get tougher and it's going to continue to build off of each week. All right? So I'll leave it there and I'll pass it back to you, Alan.
Well, Hector, you didn't disappoint. You never do, though, right? You just don't. You come. I had to laugh. I got to laugh. I was like, holy crap. So we're starting a new 4-part series, and there's to the series, there's 4 parts to the series, of course. And inside of the 4-part blueprint, there's a 4-part framework. And the 4-part framework consists of 4 components and even 4 mistakes. I'm like, holy cow, this guy's hitting like 4 bullseyes. Whatever. Anyway, crack.
Trying to keep it all together and easy to understand now.
Yeah, it's a good thing because I only have 4 fingers on the one hand, so that's good. Anyway,
Oh,
good
there
stuff.
you go.
Yeah, good stuff as always. And what I love about this is that it doesn't matter the size of our team. Even if our team is only one other person other than ourselves, this is applicable.
Absolutely.
Even if we only have one employee or the other person is the other part owner or partner with us in the company, this applies.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Inner Circle. If something in today's conversation resonated, inspired you, or gave you a breakthrough, please share it with someone you care about. The right idea at the right time can change someone's business and their life. So make sure you follow the show, leave a review, and stay connected with us, because this community is built on relationships, real support, and real growth together. Remember that clarity means nothing without action. So choose one insight from today, put it into motion this week, and notice the shift. Thank you for being part of this journey, for showing up for your growth, and for being part of the Inner Circle community. See you in the next episode, and let's keep growing together.